Good morning.
Good morning.
It's Saturday, the 23rd of January, and we're looking at Acts 15, verses 32 to Acts 16, verse 3. And I think what we've got to do just quickly is back up a tiny bit to put these kind of things into context. Obviously, it looks and feels like the young, early church is going through growing pains, wrestling with issues from the old covenant to now the new, what's appropriate, what's not. And already there has been quite some intense conversations and disagreements. And I find it interesting that by now, by the time we get to Paul and Barnabas having this conflict, there possibly have been seeds of disagreement already sown. Unfortunately, even though the elders and the apostles came to an agreement and sent them away in peace, possibly there was some seeds of disagreement already sown in. We know if you have a bad day, and you're disagreeing yourselves with friends, with colleagues, that day can only get worse some days if you haven't resolved it really well. It's just got the habit of hanging around, and then the very next thing that comes along just makes you even more cross. And I wonder if somehow, even though they were seemingly at peace with the agreement that had been said, something had been deposited that was creating an atmosphere of tension and leads to this disagreement.
I'm really glad that this passage is in the Bible, the disagreement between Paul and Barnabas, because often we think the church, we sugarcoat it as all sweet and nice, but the reality is that leaders have to make decisions, and sometimes leaders disagree. And every pastor will tell you that problems arise and disagreements arise and relationships are broken, but you have to carry on with the work. And in this passage, Paul and Barnabas Paul wants to go back and revisit the cities they've been ministering to, and Paul agrees, but wants to take John Mark with him. Now, John Mark joined them on the first missionary journey, but deserted them. And we're not told why, whether he was discouraged, the work was difficult. Paul was nearly killed on the first missionary journey, and whether Mark was too young to really get hold of the work. But they disagree over it. Barnabas wants to take him, and Paul thinks he's unreliable, can't be trusted, he's not up for the work. They disagree and they separate. And instead of one mission team going out, two actually go out. So there's a benefit. But what I love is the fact that they were able to disagree. And every pastor will tell you that there are disagreements, often in leadership level, about the team, who you take with you. And Paul was now developing a strong leadership. And obviously he did not want somebody he couldn't rely on. The great news is this isn't the end of the story. They separated and went their different ways. John Mark went with Barnabas and Paul took Silas with him. But the great news is later on, we hear that Paul actually does work with John Mark in 2 Timothy 4 and in Philemon, in Colossians. He called him his fellow worker and somebody who is helpful to my ministry. So obviously somewhere along the line, they met up again, they restored the relationship and they worked together. And that's the challenge for all of us, isn't it? Are we prepared to work through our difficulties, and even if it does take time, to come back to a place where we can work together again? So this is a great passage to be in the Bible.
Well, we hear of Barnabas not a lot after this. It says he goes to Cyprus, which is interesting because that's his hometown. So maybe he just thought he needed some home time, I don't know. But I mean, that's where he went. But there's no doubt about it that Paul learnt every time he went out on a mission trip, the good things that were working and the things that were perhaps not so good. He learnt strategic missional things. He learnt about leadership development. And he learnt every time he went out on a mission trip about developing leaders, the do's, the don'ts, the things that worked and the things that didn't. So the lovely thing about the Acts is that it's a wonderful template for us to read and see that these guys thousands of years ago made mistakes, had the disagreements, but they were at pains to try and make sure that was reconciled. And I think for any of us that have these issues, there must be something in our hearts that says, Lord, even though we might have at times these sharp disagreements, it is in our hearts to be reconciled for the good of the gospel and the sake of the kingdom.
I mean, Paul was a strong leader. He was the missionary zealot to get out and get people saved. Barnabas, he was an encourager. He wanted to build people up. And you can see I could see their personalities working against this argument with John Mark. And Paul was building team, and he was learning how to build good team. And this was a learning curve for them all. And thankfully, it ends up well.
Yeah, amen, it does. God bless you. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye.